हेलो हेलो अरे गलती से लग गया, चलो बंद कर दो।
Hello. So, good afternoon, everybody. Madam, I welcome you on behalf of Jamia Hamdard to this special lecture, which is one of the first departments which was established in Jamia Hamdard when university was formed in 1989. And internal quality assurance cell, IQAC, is also partnering with Jamia, this botany department. So we are very happy and very glad to see you, madam. This new education policy is a hot topic, and every institution is either scratching its head or just finding out where to start, where to end. Lots of I don't say lots of confusion, but I would say there is no great clarity from various people who will be delivering this to the students. Sometime statement comes, and lots of research focus is there, but institutions are struggling where from this research facility will come. Funding is not too much for research, but the government and this policy wants. So since you are a member of this committee which formulated guidelines and also policies about new education policy, we are very fortunate that you have agreed for today's deliberations. So I would request my colleague, Professor Shahid Umar, who is a botanist from Aligarh Muslim University, did all education, including PhD from there. And he is currently head of the Department of Botany. He is also a well-known botanist, especially in plant nutrition and plant physiology field. So I would request my colleague, Professor Shahid Umar, to kindly welcome the program. Professor Shahid Umar, sir.
Good afternoon to all. Hello. On behalf of my department, Department of Botany,
lecture on new education
and
policy.
Jamia Hamdard, I would like to welcome you all
Dr. Bashir. Okay.
for this important webinar on National Education Policy 2020. Before we get started, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who helped us make this event come together, especially our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor M. Afshar Alam. At Jamia Hamdard, we pride ourselves as being at the forefront of educational innovation, and we have implemented a range of initiatives to prepare our students for the future. About Jamia Hamdard, our colleague Professor Raishuddin Saab will discuss about Jamia Hamdard and about its foundation and all these things. And he will start his lecture later. As we gradually put the pandemic in rear view mirror, nations are reshifting their focus on the long-term education objectives highlighted in the United Nations 4 Sustainable Development Goal, that is quality education, also known as SDG 4, emphasizing on education as a tool to transform our world. NEP 2020 proposes the revision and revamping of all aspects of the education structure, including its regulation and governance, to create a new system that is aligned with the aspirational goals of 21st century education, including SDG 4, while building upon India's tradition and value system. India had been quite rigid in its higher education structure, but with the NEP, multiple exit points have been provided which would benefit students in signaling their education status better, as well as their employment readiness which will help India utilize demographic dividends. To elucidate, to educate us more on this, I would like to welcome Dr. Ma'am Shakila Shamsu, retired as an officer on special duty, new education policy in the Department of Higher Education, Government of India. She has been actively involved in the formulation of India's national education policy. He has been secretary to the committee to draft the national education policy. Earlier, she was involved in the preparation of the Government of India 11th and 12th five-year plan. Dr. Shakila does research in higher education, teacher education, ODL, digital and ICT learning, and educational planning and policy, and much more. Well, I do not want to take too much of your time. I need to leave time for Dr. Shakila Shamsu to educate us all to NEP 2020. So a very warm welcome to each one of you. If you have any question, suggestion, clarification, please raise your hand after the lectures. Thank you very much for listening, and let us welcome Dr. Shakila Shamsu.
So, Madam, as my colleague, Professor Shahid Umar Sahab has already introduced to you briefly, I must introduce to you, maybe, I don't know exactly whether you have been to Jamia Ahmedabad or not. It's a small university in Delhi, deemed to be university, formed in 1989, and it's mostly focuses on healthcare education, bioscience, and pharmacy is number one in NIRF. For last 3 years, we are rated as number one by NIRF, and also amongst the university and overall category, we are 100. We are also ranked by Times Higher Education. We are also ranked by QS, which are global ranking systems, and we are accredited university in 3 cycles. So this new education policy, we don't have a education department in our university, like Jamia Millia Islamia and Hyderabad University and other big universities, Manu, etc. But we have very limited humanities department. There is low languages department. So there is, because of this, sometimes the education nitty-gritty is not much clear to us. We are a scientist or biologist, botanist, biochemist, toxicologist. Our vice chancellor is a renowned computer science background professor, and this way, earlier Professor Sham Hasnain was there. He came from, he has been vice chancellor to Hyderabad University. So mostly science people are there. But the new education policy, we are happy to note that lays a lot of importance on research, and even starting at the undergraduate level, they are proposing that they should do some research project, internship, etc., etc. So these various fine points are there. We have constituted a committee under the chairmanship of one professor of humanities, that is Center for Federal Studies, Professor Ajay Kumar Singh. So, and also we have law department. For last 3 years we are admitting law students with BCI approved program, 5-year undergraduate program. So Dr. Selina Basir has joined from Kerala, there as dean and professor. So she has a good understanding of this subject. So we are also learning and trying to adapt as much as possible. The computer science department and department of this science faculty, they have and also new department of international relations and studies. We have planned to in phase wise introduce the 4-year undergraduate program, FYUP. So science faculty, BSc botany, BSc chemistry, biochemistry, these subjects, we will have 4-year this undergraduate program from the next session, that is 2023. So, but still I feel, and I am a director of internal quality assurance cell, so I know that still our teachers need a lot of orientation and also lots of education awareness about new education policy. So there can be nothing better than you, madam, that since you have been a member and officer on a special duty in the this particular new education program of Ministry of Higher Education, Government of India. So we are very happy that you kindly agreed, and next time maybe we will request you that you please come to our campus to interact with us in live mode. So with these words, I welcome, and for the benefit of the audience, I would request my colleague, Dr. Mohammad Ashraf Ashfaq, who in fact had been privileged to listen you in some program. So he suggested, in fact, and he in fact belonged to Hyderabad area. So he joined us as a assistant professor. So briefly, I would request Dr. Ashraf Ashfaq sir to kindly introduce the today's speaker, Dr. Ashraf.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Very warm welcome to all of you, and especially, guest of honor, Professor Dr. Shakila Shamshu. Ma'am, I'm really grateful to you. I'm really indebted to you for the very short notice of time that we have given, and within that you have agreed to, connect with us online on this very issue of NEP 2020, its concept, its relevance, and its implementation. Yeah, this is the need of the hour, as just outlined by Professor Raisuddin, IQAC Director, and also our head, Professor Shahid Umar. The very purpose of NEP 2020, there is a lot of loom, which is there, and people need to have a very clear picture as to what is this NEP 2020, what is its relevance, how is it different from the previous NEP 1986 policy, what is that it brings along with it, and how is it different, and what impact it is going to make on the generations of students in future times. Not just that, implementation I believe is the most stringent part of this policy, because there is still confusion as to how it should be implemented, whether it should be implemented all in in a single go, or it should be implemented in a phased manner. So with all these questions, I would request my faculty fellows to reserve their questions, a number of questions towards the end of the session. There is a devoted 17-minute slot for this, wherein they can pose questions to you. And before I could really hand over to you, ma'am, I just want to introduce you to the audience at Jamia Hamdard. So Dr. Shakila Shamshu was formerly an OSD officer on special duty, new education policy in the Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education, and she has also served as a secretary to the Committee to Draft National Education Policy. So this is the perspective, and I feel somebody who is a field worker, there can be no one better than a field worker who has already worked in this field, who can really guide us, enlighten us, and give their perspective, so that we can also implement the same at our university. So Madam is also the nodal officer of the flagship Government of India scheme on National Mission on Teachers and on Teachers Training, NMTT. This is Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya National Mission on Teachers and Teaching. And she has also been on several lead initiatives. She is responsible for new initiatives like LEAD program, Leadership for Academicians program, ARPIT, annual refresher program in teaching, and faculty induction programs, which is just the new phase of the orientation programs which are offered by UGC HRDCs all over the country. So Matt has held senior positions as Joint Advisor, Education and Planning Commission, Officer on Special Duty for 12th Plan, and in the Ministry of Education, Government of India. Her career spans around 4 decades in teaching and academics, especially pertaining to dissemination of education. And she has been an alumnus of University of Mumbai, IGNOU, and also worked for 14 years in the Government of India. And her area of interest are educational planning, policy making, teacher education, ICT, open and distance education, inclusive education, and now most relevant for all of us, post-COVID learning. Madam Professor Shakila Shamshu holds a PG diploma in distance education, a master's, and also a PhD in distance education, and simultaneously a degree in law. She has several papers to her credit in international journals, book contributions, and also she was actively involved in preparation of the 11th and 12th plan. She has served as a member on various committees of Government of India, state governments, UGC, USIEF, National Selection Committees for Fulbright Fellowships, and Academic Council of Universities. She is a member of UGC and NCTE committees for NEP 2020 implementation, and currently she serves as an honorary advisor, Special Education, Center for Public Policy and Research, Kochi, and also member of the Governing Council, India MUN, which is basically a pan-India Union, United Nations group for youth in climate action. With this, I welcome Professor Shakila Shamshu to give her perspective on NEP 2020 to the faculty fraternity at Jamia Hamza.
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad Ashfaq, Professor Raisuddin, and Professor Shahid Umar, and to the participants. And thank you for inviting me to Jamia Hamdard to make a presentation on the National Education Policy 2020. I was in Delhi for a very long time, and though I have not personally visited Jamia Hamdard, I'm quite familiar with Jamia Hamdard as an institution. In fact, I knew your former Vice Chancellor, Professor Hasnain, who was there with the University of Hyderabad when he was earlier there, as well as in IIT Delhi. I am familiar that you all are largely a healthcare education institution, but have branched out into various other domains and disciplines. But it's an opportunity that, Jamia has before itself, Jamia Hamdard has before itself, to really become and transform itself into a multidisciplinary institution. So what I propose to do in the hour and 10 minutes that I have at hand, because we would like to keep some time for the interaction, I would really like to take the journey forward in trying to put the context of NEP. And as Professor Ashfaq had mentioned, Dr. Ashfaq had mentioned, how is it standing out differently to the previous policy? Why is it so relevant in today's context? And how do we really take forward the most critical part of any policy, that is relating to the implementation of the policy? Just to check with you, I hope my audio is quite audible and there is no disturbance at your end for that.
No, madam, it's working well.
Okay, thank you. So the National Education Policy 2020 has been the outcome of a very laborious, long-drawn consultative process, which started almost in 2014, at the end of November 2014. And you know that it has got approved as a policy only in July 2020. So it's been about 5.5 long years for a policy-making exercise, which is unparalleled in, I think, human history, in an education policy-making exercise, where we have undergone a multi-pronged approach purely with the intention of making it a highly citizen-centric participatory policy-making exercise. Of course, the final policy, the NEP 2020, as a 66-page document, is the crisp outcome of the committee's report of Kasturiranganji, of which I was the secretary to that committee. But that was not the only effort in the policy-making exercise. As an exercise which tried to get stakeholder views and consultations, it would be quite fascinating to know that it is one of the most humongous exercises. Over 7 lakh suggestions have been received either in hard copy or in electronic form, or through the outcome documents that were generated over 3 or 4 levels of consultations, which involved participation right up to the village level, expert level consultations, online consultations, and an exercise which saw 3 documents being brought out. One was first the TSR Subramaniam committee report, which is there on the website of NEPA, which serviced that committee. The ministry's internal exercise, of which I was a part of, that is some inputs to the draft National Education Policy, both of which were tabled on the floor of the Parliament but were not accepted to be documents to be converted into a policy. And then the third committee, that is this committee to draft the national education policy, headed by Dr. K. Kasturiranganji, Padma Vibhushan holder, and known as an ISRO founder, the person who held the position as chairman of ISRO and has been a space scientist. And our committee's report was finally accepted by the government, on the basis of which the NEP 2020 has been brought out. Many of your doubts relating to the conceptual part of the NEP 2020, the 66-page document, would find answers in the draft NEP report, which is a voluminous 484-page document. But as Professor Raizuddin mentioned, that since most of you are scientists and people who are non-social sciences and humanities, and I'll come to why we need not make that distinction any longer, is because of the fact that most of the rationale for the recommendations that have come out in NEP 2020 have a theoretical foundation which has been outlined in the report of the committee. So as educators, with whatever discipline we may be involved with, I would urge each one of you to take out time to go through the 484-page draft report of the committee. But I must warn at this stage that you will not find NEP 2020's all recommendations there in the draft NEP. There are various places where we have made changes because of greater acceptability in terms of the nomenclature, and I'll say that while I go along. But the context, why NEP 2020 vis-a-vis 1986, is only to put in perspective that the kind of changes that have taken place over the last 3 or 4 decades since the last policy, the fact that we are living in a globally connected world, there is a onset or rather almost a revolution of information and communication technologies, disruptive technologies of artificial intelligence and machine learning, and the fact that India has a demographic advantage, or rather hopefully a demographic advantage with the largest youth population in the world, combined with our global commitment, as already mentioned by Professor Shahid Umar, that we are committed to the Sustainable Development Goal 4 to provide inclusive and quality as well as equitable education for all with lifelong learning opportunities. All these combination of situations that we are in today calls for a relook at the way our education system is catering to the needs of the 21st century. And the idea of the NEP 2020 is empowerment, empowering students who are the major stakeholders, empowering teachers who transmit or who are involved in knowledge dissemination or knowledge generation, and empowering educational institutions to become more relevant to the changing needs of the 21st century and the fact that we are living in a globally connected society. So the UN report of 1996, if many of you have not read it, Learning the Treasure Within, this is a report which talks about 21st century learning, clearly highlights that you are actually living in a time where the multidimensionality of 2 aspects have to be taken into account. Multidimensionality of learning as an activity and multidimensionality of knowledge as a domain area. Now, multidimensionality of knowledge, which is where I said that it really doesn't matter if we are scientists or we are educationists or we are botanists or we are physicists or we are legal students or students of pharmacy or vocational subjects, because today the idea of knowledge, as Professor Yashpal had rightly put, it is porous. It is drawing from other disciplines, and the porosity of knowledge results in multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity, cross-disciplinary. All these have to be accepted as a reality of the nature of knowledge itself. So if we continue to equip our students with only single discipline specializations, and I heard Professor Raizuddin mention that from the coming 22 academic session of 23, we will start offering the 4-year undergraduate program of BSc Botany and so on. It is not to be a 4-year program with only a single specialization. It has to be multidisciplinary, in which a student can major in maybe botany or physics or any natural sciences or pure or applied sciences, whatever it may be, including social science. But the student will be exposed to multiple subjects. And that is the idea of multidisciplinary higher education institutions. And the policy postulates a kind of a desire that is seen world over, already being implemented by what we call liberal arts education, to move towards becoming multidisciplinary education, not within a year span or so, but at least by 2035, that all higher education institutions within our country would move to become multidisciplinary institutions. The other is the dimension of learning itself. And learning per se has to be understood as learning to know, which is the cognitive part of it, the learning to do, which is the skills or the practicum or the as experiential part of it, and that is the knowing and the doing part of it. Learning to live together and to live with others, which is the aspect of sustainable and peaceful societies. And the most important, learning to be, which is the self-actualization of one's talents and potential. And it is this learning to be that is being highlighted in NEP 2020. And moving away from a cliche that we normally tend to use of being learner-centric, and actually providing enabling mechanisms and recommendations which will place the center at place the learner at the center of the educational structure itself and the educational system. By doing what? By accepting that every single learner and God's creation, that every single human being is unique. Unique in the sense of my capabilities, abilities, talents, aspirations, potentials, abilities in terms of maybe my liking for performing arts. All these, each one of us are unique. But unfortunately, the education system is, or rather the educational system where we are all today, we are products of today, has not recognized that uniqueness of every individual student. And we looked at a class of students, whether it is a class of 30 or a class of 60 or a class of 100, as if they were all at the same level of learning, at this, having the same competencies, having the same abilities, the same aptitudes and liking, without making a distinction between we only tend to look at those who exams and not recognizing why another student did not perform well at exams, because he may not be good at the cognitive part, but he may be good at something that is more aesthetic, or maybe that is something in terms of performing arts. And in today's world, all these talents are equally important. And that is where in the NEP 2020, we have outlined 22 cardinal principles in the very first chapter, while outlining the very important principle that every student is unique and the educational system must contribute and promote the holistic development of every single student. Now, if you want to promote the holistic development of every individual student, you must provide flexibility. So the NEP 2020 is a marked demarcation from the NP 1986 in terms of trying to ensure that there is, we move away from structured systems to more flexible systems. Flexibility in curricular choices, flexibility in modes of teaching and learning, the pedagogy, flexibility in the assessment tools and techniques, flexibility even in the medium of instruction and the language options that we give. I think there's a lot of background disturbance. Can we just
मैं अगर बता दें कि टाइम को एक्सटेंड करने वाले हैं।
हाँ तो वही
Hello, madam.
Mr. Abdul
Yeah,
Majid,
there's a lot
please
of back.
mute your
There's
mic.
a lot
please.
of background disturbance.
Abdul
मुजीब साहब जरा साउंड कर दीजिए ऑफ, अपना माइक ऑफ कर दीजिए.
Mute off. Mute.
मैं खुद ही नहीं समझ पाया क्योंकि हम लोग मीटिंग कर रहे थे वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट के ऊपर और बीच में लिया गया.
तो मुझे
कैसे हम कर सकते हैं प्लीज?
मिलना चाहते हैं किसी से कहवा भी सकते हैं.
डॉक्टर मुजीब अपना माइक ऑफ कर दीजिए.
सर आपका माइक ऑन है सर.
चलो मैंने कर दिया. चलो ओके मैडम, प्लीज कैरी ऑन.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that help. So the NEP 2020 is basically different from NP 1986, which was more in terms of structured learning to becoming more flexible in terms of the options that we provide. In terms of the options that we provide in curricular choices, in the modes of learning and pedagogy, and in the kinds of assessment. Are we having two sessions going on parallelly?
No, madam, only one. Dr.
Okay.
Mujib has some problem. मुजीब साहब प्लीज या तो एग्जिट कर जाइए या स्विच ऑफ कर दीजिए आप. मैडम प्लीज, अब मैंने किया.
Okay. So the what I would really like, because of the time constraint, I don't think I may be able to go much into the recommendations, but I would like to sort of place in perspective the broad features and then go directly into the higher education, because I would like to spend more time in terms of implementation of NEP from Jamia Hamdar's perspective. Now, the NEP 2020's distinguishing features is that it looks at education as a single continuum, meaning that we look at education starting from age 3 onwards with the early childhood care and education, and going on in a new articulation of curricular and pedagogical restructuring of school education in what we call a 5+3+3+4, which is not a physical restructuring of the schools, but is merely an attempt to the approaches to curricula and pedagogy in the 4 stages, starting from the foundational stage, which incorporates within itself the ECCE, then the preparatory stage, the middle stage, and the secondary stage, which covers between classes 9 to 12, which currently where we talk about the 11 and 12 being either a junior college or being a pre-university or being the +2 level, as we call it in common parlance. The whole idea is that when we say foundational and when we say starting at age 3, we are only trying to say that the approach has to be one which focuses on joy-based learning in the foundational stage, going to the preparatory stage, preparing the learners to learn in a formal setting with reading and writing, then going to the middle stage, which is the most critical stage in a certain sense, because all these flexibility and doing away with the hard separations of arts, science, academic, vocational, curricular subjects, extracurricular subjects, co-curricular, we are doing away with that completely. All CBSE based schools are already doing that from the coming academic year. In fact, they started it from the previous academic session itself in the second half, after we started reopening the schools post the COVID situation. And the secondary stage, which is looking at the ages 14 to 18 as one single group, where we might completely do away with the idea of having the class 10 examinations as a very critical factor to make choices, and looking at a 9, 10, 11, 12 as one single stage called the secondary stage. Now, all these flexibilities that we talked about in doing away with curricular, co-curricular, so a student who takes painting, who takes up, let us say, carpentry, or who takes up learning of an additional language, where today we are not giving any credits and weightage, will also be given credit weightages, and all disciplines or all subjects, as we call normally in school education, will have credits and weightage given to it. By that exercise, the first principle that I said, if someone is good at singing, someone is good at dancing, someone is good at painting, someone is good at dramatics, someone is good at environmental related activities like planting and so on, all these opportunities will be provided to the students in a certain sense, by which we will say that all talent, not just maths and science or engineering and medicine, all are equally important to the individual's development, but we should be able to provide for holistic development of the individual. The whole idea is to make or appreciate, recognize individual differences while contributing to the holistic development of the student. Now, it is exact, and at the same time, let me also mention this point of equity, because a country like India, which has a lot of cross sections of the society and whom we believe are not having adequate opportunities for their development in, or rather their participation in the educational system, must be given adequate avenues. As we all rightly recognized that if we are to achieve sustainable development, then all sections of the society should be able to get an equal right.
No, ये इसकी आवाज नहीं, कभी कट रहा है, जा रहा है, कट रहा है, इसको देखो तो माइक आवाज क्यों नहीं आ रही?
The idea is therefore that equity and inclusion in school education and in higher education is critical to achieving the so-called goals of being able to provide access, equity, quality, accountability, and affordability. And as someone had rightly mentioned, the vision is to provide for a globally recognized 21st century education system. You cannot have a globally recognized education system if large sections of the society remain outside the educational mainstream. And therefore, equity and inclusion, where we are talking about the socially and educationally, socially and economically disadvantaged groups, is an important aspect of both school education and higher education. Now, in the NEP 2020, let me move directly to higher education and say that in higher education, the goals that NEP 2020 has stated, quantitatively, it has only one goal, and that is to reach a gross enrollment ratio of 50% by 2035. As per the All India Survey for Higher Education of 2019-20, we stand at a gross enrollment ratio of 27.1. In absolute numbers, it is something like about 36 million students, and we would like to see almost it getting doubled in the coming 14 to 15 years. Now, as an institution, Jamia Hamdard may not really need to understand the gross enrollment ratio part of it so much as also trying to understand that in your own disciplines, can you have additional batches? Can you open new departments so that your number of students can go up? You already have, as I had seen, a school of open and distance learning, and whether you can get in more students over there. Can you add on in relation to your core disciplines where you have a lot of faculty available, additional allied courses which will provide skill sets to students and therefore skilling in higher education? These are aspects that you need to really start working upon. And this goal of the gross enrollment ratio is something that is more for a, I would say, for a system that is taken care by the ministry or by the University Grants Commission. But institutions also need to start seeing what is my mass of students and whether this mass of students alone is adequate, or can we increase that mass of students. Now, on the other aspects of higher education, NEP 2020 makes out a very strong case of providing for integrated, multidisciplinary, flexible undergraduate program. Integrated, by which it is integrating all disciplines, and therefore it is multidisciplinary. It is also holistic because it is covering many disciplines together. And it is flexible because it is allowing it to be either 3 years or 4 years. And the undergraduate program will be completely changed from what it is currently being offered by institutions, by the higher education institutions. On the nature of the higher education institutions, while today India has the largest number of higher education institutions in the world, 1,000 plus universities, 40,000 affiliated colleges, 15,000 standalone institutions, we have looked at in the policy the higher education institution by the function it performs. Ultimately, higher education has 3 functions. One is knowledge dissemination, which is what we are doing by teaching; knowledge generation, which is what is research, knowledge generation or knowledge production, patents, publications, and so on; and extension or social engagement with the community. And that is an equally important part. So teaching, research, and extension need to go hand in hand together if a higher education institution fulfills what it performs as a university. It needs to ensure that a student is being prepared in terms of good teaching. A student is also inculcated with research skills. At the same time, there is a social commitment by which you are engaging with the community for betterment of the community and the society. So the NEP 2020 has basically tried to categorize or rationalize higher education institutions in terms of the function that it performs. And initially, we talked about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. That's where I said that the draft NEP and the NEP 2020 might be varied on different 2-3 aspects. And this is one critical aspect where we are saying teaching intensive universities. Such universities such as yours might be giving degrees for undergraduate education, but you can be teaching intensive with research, which currently I understand you are doing a lot in terms of research, as I see from your own website that you encourage a lot of research that is happening. But encouraging research not just at the postgraduate and the doctoral level, but bringing or integrating research at the undergraduate level is what the NEP is visualizing. Now, research intensive universities, where they would focus largely on PG education and doctoral studies or postdoctoral studies, and in undergraduate education confine themselves to only 1 or 2 disciplines, will be the research intensive institutions. And the third category, which does not really apply to Jamia Hamdard, but which is the large number of affiliating colleges, which are around 40,000 in numbers. These institutions we would like to see over a period of about 15 years becoming degree granting autonomous colleges. And not for a second, I am trying to suggest that India will be by 2035 a country which will have something like 50,000 universities, not at all. We are only saying that from this 40,000 degree granting colleges, 40,000 affiliated colleges, some of them can go on to become teaching universities. Some of them can become autonomous degree granting colleges. Some of them can form as clusters to become one large teaching university. So different options are provided. But the idea is that all these colleges also, whether they form as a cluster, whether they decide to convert themselves to become teaching universities, or even the existing teaching universities such as Jamia Hamdard, will have to work on becoming multidisciplinary higher education institutions. The idea of multidisciplinarity is not for a fancy. The idea of multidisciplinarity is globally. The world is looking, when they look for students to take up employment in their organizations, not I-shaped individuals. I-shaped means only vertical depth in a particular single discipline. They look at depth and range, what we normally call today as T-shaped individuals, where the person should have good social skills, good communication skills, good collaborative skills, at the same time digital and technological skills. And you cannot just confine themselves to understanding either economics or physics or botany or medicine or pharmacy in a single discipline, because knowledge itself has become interdisciplinary and the nature of learning itself has become multidimensional. So when the world as an industry and as an economy looks for T-shaped individuals to fill in their jobs, because you need multiple skills and multiple competencies, and both higher order thinking skills as well as deep discipline skills, as well as research skills, as well as digital skills, human values, all those things combine together to make what we call a complete individual. An education system which will focus on single discipline education is bringing about not necessarily job ready individuals. Ultimately, while the purpose of education is not just employment, it has a much larger goal in preparing well-rounded 21st century citizens of this country. The idea is also that they are productive. And if they have to be productive, they should have those skills and capabilities to actually become productive individuals. So if we need to do that, we might theoretically, conceptually, and because we belong to a generation where it is very difficult to unlearn, cannot even accept the idea that botany along with physics or along with economics or along with law or along with agriculture has to be offered together, is something that for us as faculty, we will have to unlearn to accept that all disciplines are equally important and we should be able to make provisions for all of it within our institution. Now, the other goals of higher education is to promote research, to provide what we call empowered faculty by giving them adequate opportunities for their continuous professional development, promoting open and distance learning, strengthening vocational education, promoting internationalization of higher education, putting a lot of emphasis on research and entrepreneurship and looking at what we call innovation, creating innovation and embedding technology within education. These are other goals. But let me come now to the focus of some of the important guidelines that will help you as an institution to move towards the implementation of NEP 2020. Now, I think many of you may be visiting the website of the University Grants Commission, and there are very important guidelines that have been brought out, some of which are in draft stage and some of which are in the stage of already getting notified and accepted by the commission. But maybe before I go to the guidelines, let me clarify to you what the 4-year undergraduate program will look like when you start implementing it from the coming academic session. As I mentioned, the idea is of multidisciplinarity, and therefore in the draft guidelines that we have put up on the UGC website, if you have a look at it, we are talking in terms of a first, and we are allowing for multiple entry and exit. So at the end of every year, a student can exit. So at the end of the first year, that is 2 semesters, the student will complete something like around 40 credits or so, and end of the second year completes around something like 80 credits or so. 1 credit being treated as something like 15 hours of input study, including what assignments we do. And if it's a practical based course, that 1 credit is equivalent to something like 30 credits. Now, 80 credits if it is diploma level. First is the certificate level, second year is the diploma level, third year is the bachelor's degree level. A student can exit from the undergraduate program completely without wanting to continue with the bachelor's degree. And such a student does it for something like about 120 credits or so, and finally that 140 credits, which is for the final year that we are talking about. So every year, a student, today we treat that student who has completed first year and left as a failure. The idea is lifelong learning with flexibility, because a student may complete the first year but may decide to rejoin after 4 years. So we are allowing for the entry and the exit and the re-entry provision within a period of about 7 years time. So the academic bank of credit which has already been notified on the University Grants Commission website, and I had a look whether your university has listed itself or has onboarded the ABC. Jamia Hamdard is not there on the Academic Bank of Credits. So as an institution, you need to first onboard yourself onto the ABC provisions so that your students can get the benefit of this multiple entry and exit. And that is the first part that Jamia Hamdard may have to do as an institution. As far as the student is concerned, why the ABC becomes important is that the student is doing multiple disciplines. Now, Jamia Hamdard has certain departments, but it does not have, let us say, if I wanted to learn music, or I wanted to learn carpentry, or I wanted to learn some other subject which is not offered in Jamia, then Jamia Hamdard will have to enter into an academic collaboration with another institution within its vicinity, allowing the student to do courses from that institution, and credits earned from that institution goes into his digital or her digital bank of academic credits. This idea of an academic bank of credit is basically to allow students to have choices of courses not offered by the host institution into which he or she has taken admission, but where the student is having an interest and an aspiration to do so. So by having an academic bank of credit, the student is storing the credits where all credits acquired for the academic courses completed from different institutions go into his digital storage of credits. Now the ABC is tying up with two ways by which a student can do that. The ABC is tying up with the National Academic Depository, or it is tying up with the DigiLocker facility, so that you are storing all your academic credits in a digital form, which can be retrieved at any time by the individual or by the institution or by a prospective employer or any foreign university in the world, anywhere, accessible to anyone by providing the normal login details. So this facility allows the student to take up courses from multiple institutions. It also allows to take up through multiple modes. Now, you know that we have Swayam as a platform, and the massive open online courses are offered through the Swayam platform. So we have all clearly said in the NEP, and the draft guidelines also clearly say that the acquisition of academic credits by a student, not just in a face-to-face mode from other universities, but also from open and distance learning institutions and MOOCs, is equally acceptable at the undergraduate level. And the University Grants Commission, just when we were in the phase of COVID, initially they had allowed 20% of academic, 20% of your entire academic credits to be done through MOOCs. As from now, from June 2020, it has been made 40%. So 60% of the credits of, let us say, a person is doing only 120 credits course, bachelor's degree, now 40% of those credits can come through MOOCs or through open and distance learning mode. Now, this facility will allow students to take up courses where there is no educational institution around offering some courses. Say a student wants to learn Japanese language or a Korean language, no university is offering, it's not there on MOOCs, then the person can do it through universities, ODL system, or it can do it, if it is not being offered by any university in face-to-face, it is offered in a MOOCs course, then the student can do it from there either. So this flexibility of allowing a student to choose a combination of courses, which we have not seen at all, and therefore is a revolutionary change from the NP 1986, where you were specializing in single disciplines. Here we are asking to do away with single discipline specializations, and so your bachelor's degree will be a bachelor's degree within brackets whatever you have majored in, where you have taken more than 50% credits in a given discipline. Now, up to the 3 years, the student has the flexibility to exit and rejoin. At every year, the student is not treated a failure, but gets a completion certificate. It is a certificate in first year, diploma in the second year, or a bachelor's degree in the third year. And even in all these 3 years, the student compulsorily does an internship project. If it is an application-based course, it can be an apprenticeship, or if it is a non-application-based course, it will be an internship. And all the 3 years, the student will have that if the person is intending to leave. But suppose the student has joined, no, I'm going to do my 3 years bachelor's. Then in the first year and the second year, the student need not take up an internship project. The student can take it up only at the end of the third year. Now, coming to the 4-year program, there are 2 options available. Either the student takes a bachelor's with honors, specializing in one or more than one disciplines. And in the 7th semester itself, that is in your 4th year, you will start with a research project if you want it with an honors. And if you want to take up a bachelor's with specialization with honors, that is your 4-year bachelor's, it is a specialization and you are going to submit a research project. Such a student need not even do a master's program and directly can enroll for a PhD program. So the bachelor's of 4 years is having 2 options. One with specialization, which is a normal bachelor's degree. Such a student will do a 1 year of master's and then register for PhD if he or she is interested. But if that person has done it with a research project, that is a bachelor's with research project, then that student is exempted from doing a master's completely. So the combination goes like this: 3 years bachelor's, 2 years of master's. 4 years bachelor's without research will have 1 year of master's. And 4 years of bachelor's with research need not do a master's, can directly go for the PhD program. This is the flexibility and the combinations that we are allowing. And I would urge you now, because you are hearing me for the first time regarding this, it may not be, unless I had a 3-hour session and I was actually delineating it in detail for you, it might sound Greek and Latin until you read the draft guidelines. So have a look at 3 guidelines that is there in the UGC website. The draft guidelines for the 4-year undergraduate program, the approved guidelines for multidisciplinary education, and where there are very clear-cut guidelines how institutions can move to become multidisciplinary, and draft guideline and final guidelines for multiple entry and exit. The National Higher Education Qualifications Framework, the NHEQF, and the Academic Bank of Credit. These 2 also are supplementary and you must be able to read it. Have a look at the website, create an account. You will come to know how this actually operationalizes. But most important for Jamia Hamdard right now that it needs to embark upon is to prepare a very important document, that is what we call an institutional development plan. So the NEP 2020 has said every higher education institution needs to carve for itself an action plan where it would like to see its institution going forward in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, and maximum 15 years by 2035. Would you like to become a teaching intensive university? If so, what are the other multidisciplinary disciplines that you would like to start? Where are the faculty you're going to get them from? What are the allied courses that you may like to start? This all, it is like a SWOT analysis that you do along with a vision map of how you will build up your institution going forward. And somebody has to be identified as a nodal officer within the institution to prepare the IDP, but that is not going to be an individual exercise because all the departments need to come together to say how they could go forward in offering multidisciplinary programs. So when looking at multidisciplinary undergraduate programs, we have clearly said there are some common courses. These common courses include languages, the idea of knowledge of India, the health and awareness, environment, fundamental values that we need to have. These are, and digital and technological skills. This many categorization we call as being the common courses. Then there are discipline specific courses, whether it's in natural sciences, social sciences, technology or applied sciences, or health related courses, vocational courses. In all these areas, what are the courses that we can try to cover? What are the multidisciplinary courses where a student, as being a basically a healthcare offering institution, where if a student is offering pharmacy but wants to learn law and wants to learn maybe a subject in sociology or wants to learn something in performing arts, where are that opportunities going to come from? So the IDP, along with reading with all these guidelines, will help you to carve for yourself what your NEP aligned 4-year undergraduate curriculum will look like. We are only giving you a broad curricular framework. How you are going to put these together, it's like cooking a recipe. We are telling you what all the ingredients are, but ultimately you need to understand what are those ingredients, in what combination you would like to do it together, so that the student gets a workable recipe for them to become employable, for them to have the 21st century skills, for them to have collaborative skills, to have research skills, technological skills, sensitivity to the downtrodden, having compassion and other values which are integral to a human being, including constitutional values and so on. This calls for a complete relook at the way we faculty need to deal with our students. And that is why the chapter 13, which talks about energized, motivated, and capable faculty, highlights the criticality of faculty as most important to bringing about this kind of transformation by creating in their classrooms what we call active learning environments, where the student is not a passive learner. The student and the teacher are actively engaged in not just the transaction of the curricula through various pedagogies, but involved with a lot of activities, including gamification and many other techniques by which students actually engage with the curricula and not just depend on rote-based memorization learning, which is making them unemployable because there is a real disconnect between what they actually, let us say, just memorized and regurgitated on an answer script and completely forgot about it when they went into the world of work. So the active learning environments, students are equally motivated as much as faculty are engaging them. Faculty and learners are evolving themselves in that understanding of that discipline, in transmitting what we call the 21st century skills of collaborative learning, cognitive thinking, problem solving abilities, critical thinking, the handling stress, time management, and other aspects relating to socio-emotional intelligence, social skills, and so on. Now, this calls for complete relook at the way we faculty conducted ourselves so far and what is expected of us as we go forward if we have to meet the NEP requirements, which calls for the continuous professional development and the new types of programs such as the faculty induction programs and other training programs are based on this approach, that we should give the whole idea is that all faculty firstly are familiarized with NEP and they start owning the NEP. Let me be very clear, any policy, if it is seen as a third person trying to do it, that policy will never take off on ground. We need to assimilate it ourselves, own it ourselves, accept it, to transmit it in that effective manner. And that is why all the faculty training programs that we are now looking at, whether you call it refresher courses or orientation programs or induction programs, whatever nomenclature you try to do, they must be workshop based, where actually faculty understand how we create active learning environments, there is learner engagement, problem solving activities, group based activities, the kind of learner centric approach, as we really mean it in that sense, is undertaken by integrating technology also and digital skills within our students. Entrepreneurial skills, startups, having innovation clubs, having industry academia linkages. So we need to move away, and there is a whole new array of opportunities where we give up our very standard way of thinking and try to look at all these innovative ways in which we can engage our learners so that they have the right kind of knowledge, skills, and capabilities that make them productive individuals for the globalized economy. Now, the policy emphasizes on internationalization, and I was happy to see or hear from Professor Raizuddin that you have a particular department which handles that. The idea is, under Study in India programs, we would like to see inflow of foreign students into our campuses, as well as encourage student exchanges, faculty exchanges, encourage or explore the possibilities of joint degrees, dual degrees, twinning programs. And I believe you already have an international students office which tries to facilitate this. But moving forward, the NEP would like to see opening up of new campuses of foreign universities, but that being a legislative exercise, it seems to be a long drawn possibility of becoming a reality. Now, on equity, in the draft NEP 2019 report, we called a term or used a term underrepresented groups. And when we invited public comments, maximum opposition came to the usage of that word underrepresented groups, which seemed to be more Americanized, whereas in the Indian context, it did not reflect all the marginalized disadvantaged groups. And so we had a more acceptable term of the socially and economically disadvantaged groups. So while the NP 1968 and 1986 had separate sections on the education of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, minorities, linguistic and religious, women, disabled, in this policy, we have used an omnibus term of socially and economically disadvantaged groups to cover all these segments: the SCs, STs, OBCs, linguistic and religious minorities, women, transgenders, those living in geographically inaccessible areas, urban poor, those coming from vulnerable sections such as migrants, children born out of prostitution, and so on. All this categorization, and we have called that group as socially and economically disadvantaged group. And we have set special interventions such as earmarked gender inclusion funds, social inclusion funds, identifying locations as special education zones, and providing enhanced scholarships both by public and private institutions is a hallmark of SCDGs, rather enhancing the educational participation of the SCDGs into the educational system. But more importantly, a game changer relates to the medium of instruction. In school education, I don't know whether all of you have been keeping track, a lot has been said these days in the recent times, and just as the policy was brought out also, in terms of the medium of instruction in school education being the home language or the mother tongue or the local language. And that we would like, as far as possible up to grade 3, that children are taught in the language that they're most familiar with, which is normally the mother tongue, or it is the home language or the local language. The greatest challenge to implementing that policy is the availability of teachers. But the policy recognizes the importance of learning multiple languages. It is borne out by evidence also that children learn languages best between the ages of 2 and 8, and they can learn multiple languages in an effortless manner. And learning more languages has a direct benefit on the cognitive thinking and abilities of children. And that is why, as a country which is rich to a plurality of languages, we must be able to leverage this where the rest of the world does not have that advantage, and rather that making it as a dividing point, making it as a unifying factor to actually reap the demographic dividend of our people by strengthening language education right from schools, allowing them to learn multiple languages, and in higher education, opening more departments of languages. And in the higher education undergraduate programs, for the first time, the NEP has recommended that we can offer undergraduate programs in regional languages. With all due credit to the fact that English is a very important language, and in no way trying to reduce the importance of English as a medium of instruction, there are scores of people in our country who do not join the portals of higher education because of the fact that it is being offered in a language that they are not familiar with. India is an agrarian country, and a farmer living in the interior part of any part of this country does not wants to take up higher education, but is deterred by the fact that he is a first generation learner, has nobody to give a backup to provide it if it is in English language. And therefore the NEP 2020 has a game changer recommendation that we will offer undergraduate programs in regional languages, make it bilingual as far as possible, depending on the availability of faculty. As far as availability of textbooks and reading material, the translation and interpretation mission, along with the funding provided by the Finance Commission, is already giving a lot of funds for translating existing reading material, reference books, and so on in multiple languages, including development of e-content in regional languages. But what is most important in that is the need to have bilingual faculty. All India Council for Technical Education already announced, and you know that the JEE exams, the NEET exams, and many of these examinations for entrances to the admissions to undergraduate programs are being offered in regional languages. 8 states came forward to offer engineering education in regional languages. So you are seeing that India is sort of taking advantage of the linguistic plurality that we have as a privilege that we have to actually increase the base of students joining higher education. So if we have to reach the 50% GER by 2035, these inclusive methods are critical to reaching that gross enrollment ratio of including bilingual education, regional language undergraduate programs, and making available many other access devices, including a common Indian sign language, so that even those who are hearing impaired, those who are not able to see, having braille textbooks and so on, in the having textbooks for those who are not able to see in braille, even for higher education. These are some of the efforts that are being sort of undergone to actually enhance the gross enrollment ratio. The policy encourages open and distance learning by strengthening the quality assurance mechanisms. It seeks to strengthen and integrate vocational education. But coming to the students, what is it that institutions have to do? We lay a lot of emphasis on the student support system, and that it is very, very critical to ensure that students actually take advantage of multidisciplinary education. So other than the career counseling and the academic counseling, a major concern that is there with us is the lack of psychological counseling and social counseling, which is very essential today. We are dealing with students who are born in the 21st century. They were born with the internet. They were born with the mobile, unlike you and me, who struggle with these gadgets. The advantages of these internet and mobile, while it is well understood, the disadvantages of it in terms of isolation, in terms of lot of student stress and overexposure to social media, has resulted in student suicides, have resulted in a lot of psychological problems, and these need to be addressed by our higher education institution. So health and wellness, both from the mental point of view and from the physical fitness point of view, has to be taken care of by creating what we call optimal learning environments. Optimal learning environments must look at the holistic development of the student, not from academic counseling, but also from socio-emotional counseling, psychological counseling, avenues for health and wellness, as well as trying to ensure that they have opportunities to participate in a number of other efforts by environment clubs, debating clubs, poetry clubs, dramatics, and so on, which is critical to the holistic development of an individual. So I think this would be a very critical part of not only providing student support, but opportunities for students to participate in various aspects of university life other than pure learning related activities, which allow for their other talents to be also nurtured and promoted in the university environment. So when creating an institutional development plan, these aspects also need to be critically looked at, including the skilling part of it in terms of what are those subjects that can be integrated for their skill development and so on. Technology in education is a very critical part of the NEP 2020, and we have written 2 chapters, both chapter 23 and 24 relate to use of technology in education, which is not just for improving the quality of education and making it available through integrating it by online courses and many other ways, but also the recognition of the fact which COVID made us sort of accelerate the use of technology and going for online, but addressing the lack of student preparedness, teacher preparedness, and institutional preparedness, and the major digital divide that this country faces. So looking at all these aspects, every institution needs to also create its own technology plan of how it can deal with these aspects of integrating technology for better teaching learning, integrating technology for ERP solutions, integrating technology for better data management and maintenance of data, all this along with the learning, the gaps that have been caused by online and digital divides need also to be addressed. And governance and regulation on the internal governance, I don't want to touch upon the regulation part because that is a legislative exercise. Once the HECI bill is brought about, UGC and AICT and NCT and all will no longer exist, and we will have 4 independent verticals for regulation, accreditation, academic standard setting and funding, and the umbrella legislation of the Higher Education Commission. But for the internal governance, the documents that I mentioned to you talk in terms of having, strong academic councils, but most important, an empowered board of governors. This empowered board of governors is a collegiate body which will include not just these people representing the leadership and the management of the institution, but will include the faculty, will include the students, would include the civil society, industry, educationists, and all cross sections of the society, so that you create a vision map, and which vision map gets in a micro level through the institutional development plan. So the empowered board of governors will strengthen internal accountability and exclude external interference by the bureaucracy, by the government, and we've been very explicit, no words minced in this regard. The final aspect I would like to touch upon is that the policy looks at a substantial public investment in education and strengthening public education system while recognizing the role of the private sector, but re-emphasizing the fact that education is a public service and a public good, and therefore education as an activity cannot be commercialized, and it cannot become a for-profit activity, but allowing both public and private institutions to be governed by the same set of norms and standards and the same regulatory mechanism across all levels from preschool education to professional education. So the NEP 2020 is a very far-reaching document which will take about almost 20 years till it finally fructifies by 2040. The implementation, as I say in most of the webinars I address, don't look at ourselves as Atlas carrying the globe on our shoulders. Look at your role in what is your contribution expected to make the NEP 2020 a reality as a faculty, as an educational administrator, as a vice chancellor, as a director or a dean. This part of what is expected of each one of us, if we put our heads together and we own the policy and are convinced that this is doable, then we may be able to implement it. And the implementation also is not in one go. It will take place in phases only. It will not happen overnight because no social changes happen overnight. It's a long drawn process. There's a lot of unlearning, new learnings, trainings involved, and accepting that these changes are for the betterment of our students, teachers, and education institutions. So in a phased manner, and the guidelines that the University Grants Commission brings out, and in your case, though the Medical Council of India would remain outside the purview of the Higher Education Commission of India, all medical education will be part of multidisciplinary education. Therefore, you also will have to start looking at becoming a multidisciplinary institution. I think I'll stop over here and maybe take on some questions. I hope somebody coordinates those questions and puts it across to me. Thank you very much.
Yeah, madam. Thank you very much for a very, very elaborated lecture. And I understand that among the listeners and participants, there must be some question. Madam, one question is from Mr. Dr. Syed Iqbal Murtaza. He is asking that in NEP, government plans to set up National Assessment Center. So is it the NAC kind of assessment or is it students' assessment? What kind of assessment centers they are?
No, so that is, there is a National Assessment Center in school education. That is, that is
student
quite
evaluation.
different. Yeah, that is not really student evaluation.
Yeah,
We have 40 school boards. That is the state boards, then the CBSE, the ICSE, and so on taken together. For that, we will have a rationalization of school boards through the National Assessment Center, which has now been given a new nomenclature called PARAK, and which is a different body. But under the Higher Education Commission of India, we are talking about 4 independent verticals, and we will have a National Assessment Council that will be an umbrella body as a super accreditor, or rather a National Accreditation Council, NAC. That NAC and this NAC are completely different. The NAC, NBA, and all will be subsumed within this National Accreditation Council. That is the other NAC that is there as a vertical within the Higher Education Commission of India. So one is NAC of school boards in school education. Another is National Accreditation Council, which is there in Higher Education Commission of India.
Dr. Nidhi is a faculty member from Clinical Research Department. She is keen to know that in the BSc course, in the last year, for whole 1 year, there will be only research or thesis work only. There won't be any subject papers.
No.
Yes,
there
madam.
will be, along with research, there will be 3 or 4 other disciplinary subjects that they will be doing. It's that the major focus will be on research, but you will have 3 or 4 other subjects that can be taught in the 4th year also.
Also, one scholar is asking that is related to she is more keen to that now, since during in NEP, even BSc undergraduate students can also get admission into the PhD program. So how it will be managed? There will be some MSc, there will be some BSc, the knowledge level, and
no,
graduate.
So it's like this. When we roll it out,
yes, madam,
it will depend. Let us assume that all higher education institutions from 2023 start implementing the 4-year undergraduate program. And by 2027, that is the academic session when the 4th year is over, they are implementing the new multidisciplinary program where in the 4th year the student is doing a bachelor's with research. Only such students are exempted from the masters and can go into the PhD program directly. It's a three entry levels.
Yes,
one is those who do 3 years bachelor's will do 2 years masters, like currently we are doing, and then that. Yes. So the one who is doing the 4-year bachelor's with research, which will come into effect
Yes.
only by about 2027 or so.
2027.
Yes, but only then we will move into that, not the current system that we are talking about.
Also, one gentleman is asking again, Dr. Syed Murtaja, about the right to education. That is, there was one policy about right to education, and how to check the dropouts, issues of dropouts in elementary level education. Especially, he is focusing on gender orientation. That is amongst the girls.
Okay.
How to tackle, because in the new education policy it is assumed that everybody will keep on passing, moving forward, but there are lots of dropouts cases also, especially in girls and village girls. Can you just highlight some?
Yeah, 2 or 3 things. One, currently the Right to Education Act, that is the RT Act 2009, it covers ages 6 to 14, and it, in terms of the implementation of the RT Act, the kind of resources required where all children in the ages of 6 to 14 have not really been still brought into the education system. We see children at the traffic signals who are begging and so on. They have still not. I mean, there are many of them who still remain outside the RT Act, and efforts have to be made to ensure that all children are brought into the schooling system. Now, the NEP 2020 does 2 things. One is that we are focusing on the ages between 3 to 6, because many children tend to drop out in classes 1 and 2 because they have come in from the Anganwadi system where they have not gone to a preschool or a play school. And therefore, their preparedness to learn, when they're placed with other children who come with that background, puts them at a disadvantage, as a consequence of which they drop out. So we are focusing on the curriculum framework for early childhood care and education, which will ensure that joy-based learning and activity-based learning will start getting exposed to all children from ages 3 onwards. Coupled with that, in the foundational stage, we have a mission mode program called the National Foundational Literacy and Numeracy Mission. The 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic, which is critical to any learning foundation that we build upon. That is being already formulated through a scheme that has come into force called the Nipun Bharat program. Now, these 2 efforts of the ECCE along with the Foundational Literacy and Numeracy Mission is seen to be achieving universal enrollment of all boys and girls in that eligible age group to be completed by about 2030. So by 2030, all children in that age group will complete it. And let us understand that just as we had the RT where children went up to class 8, we are not saying that there will be no exams, but students will be assessed periodically to ensure that their progress is monitored so that they acquire the right kind of numeracy skills, the conceptual understanding and so on, to be able to move to higher classes with actual good academic performances. So it is both access, ensuring the equity, as well as the quality by which all cross sections will have at least minimum levels of learning that will ensure that they are able to move on in that learning continuum. So, but we cannot extend, and the policy is also not trying to say that the RT Act will be expanded from up to 3 years on the lower end and up to 18 years on the higher end, because the kind of financial requirement for such a wide kind of an RT Act is something that we are not envisaged. Mind you, what is very difficult is that education as a subject is in the concurrent list.
Yes.
And therefore, the union government, along with the states, have to make those funds available. And states are at different levels of preparedness. You know that because you can find one state which will be very high on the education index. Let's say the state I'm currently sitting in, Kerala. But another state may not reach that level of preparedness. So all the reforms cannot take place in a uniform manner because the levels of preparedness are different. So when addressing the gender gaps also, action plans for each of these strategies are critical to ensuring that we address the gender gaps also. This has to be the approach in implementing that policy, so that policy has already stated FLN mission, ECC, a new framework addressing the gender gaps, regional gaps, and so on. But each state has to prepare an action plan to ensure the I would say a very homogeneous kind of an implementation, not standardization, not uniformization either.
Yes, madam. I think madam has answered very well. My query is that, madam, this cost of this new education policy comes with lots of new types of experimentation, new types of bodies, training of teachers to even to reorient to them to the new kind of education system. Also, every time there is emphasis on research. But the type of research funding which will be required, because to create laboratories, to create IT infrastructure, uh, uh, still not to any global standards we have. Even cities like Delhi, if you, not all schools, not all universities, colleges are equally equipped. So this 1 year semester training, internship, and a lot of these investment is required in terms of this. So what is your committee's thought, or your commission's thought about the funding of these, leave about the teaching, but about the new kind of setups for research and for whole 1 year research? If you want, if, for example, in biology science, if you do research, molecular biology research, it's all very expensive. It's not just demonstration. Students like to do by their own hands. So how come these? And also one more query was there. These parak and many types of these bodies, or these kind of uh, uh, groups will be created. How we will monitor the quality of their own functioning? For example, how is it gigantic effort? That is what I am telling. So how to manage that, madam?
Two things that you're talking about on the funding part, as far as the policy goes, and you know that right from the Kothari Commission report, we have said investment should be at least 6% of the GDP. We are somewhere around 4.3, taking the entire investment in education as a percentage of the gross domestic product. But be that as it may, one thing I have noticed, and that comes basically from my planning commission experience, there are various ways by which we can leverage funds. Now, for example, research. The NRF, as a body which is functioning within the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister, that body provides a lot of research grants, whereas we are looking at research grants only from UGC. DST provides grants, DBT provides grants, the NRF provides grants. All these sources are open to the institutions to leverage it. So we need to really try and actually put people in our institution to see all the funding sources available for us for different types of research that is there. In addition to that, we have failed to leverage funding from the corporate sector. Where do our students finally go to? They go to the corporate sector. And many of our ancillary activities in the universities, where we spend our development grants, have to be actually mobilized through the industry. So a lot of these IITs, though they get something like 800 crores per annum, and which is a huge sum. They are the I would say, the kind of zamindars in our educational system, because getting a Government of India fund to the tune of 800 crores is something unimaginable for a university which gets something like a paltry 10 crores or 12 crores per annum. Where even such institutions like them, they leverage a lot of industry support, create industry academy cells where the industry funds that particular research. So and conventional universities like us do not actually try and leverage that. So the NEP really says alumni funding, corporate sector funding, individual philanthropy, institutional philanthropy, additional to the various funding sources available through governmental agencies, must be seen together so as to meet all these requirements. So there's a lot of financial innovativeness that would be required, and people have to go to think out of the box for that. Now, the other question, I'm sorry, I seem to have forgot. Yeah, the monitoring part of it. Now, Parak or the new bodies, whatever we create, have all been provided with an internal monitoring mechanism. Even the NEP itself as a document, we said we should have something like a review committee which takes into account the implementation on a year-to-year basis, and over a 3-year period, over a 5-year period, make mid-course corrections. See, we might say that this will work, but when we actually go to implement, we realize that there are a lot of bottlenecks. So we need to do that mid-course corrections by having an internal review mechanism for that. So all these bodies, all when they are created itself, in the DPR that we make, a critical part is their part of monitoring and managing their performance, so that they themselves have got internal committees to ensure that this is working as per the expected goals that it was set out for. So there is a fail-safe mechanism, but we learn as we go along, and that should not be a deterrent from actually embarking on the implementation. We should walk the path.
You are right. We need to try because sometimes regarding funding, you mentioned about IITs, but a university remotely sitting in some place in Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand, and other not so industry intensive states, how they will generate money from industry, because industry also would like to go to IIT or IIM or CSR Institute, ICMR Institute for any kind of collaboration, or for any CSR, even corporate social responsibility funding also, they choose IITs and all that. So there is no equal distribution of the research grant. Even in Delhi, they will first go to IIT. If IIT refuses, then they go to JNU, then they see Delhi University. Then finally, if nothing is happening, they will come to Jamia. So these issues are there, no doubt. But as you mentioned, we need to try and adapt and find out ways and means how we can succeed.
And your core strengths, sir. See, actually, every institution has a core strength. See, when India privatized airlines, we allowed private airlines to operate only if they operated in the mofussil towns.
Yeah.
So it became a cross subsidization. In the same way over here, even when we talk of Jharkhand or any of these places, they're very good at their natural resources, and they have some core strength which is there. You see, there is a USP for every place. India is actually a bounty where every place has a USP, and we need to leverage on that. It can be tribal knowledge systems, it can be some kind of mining that is peculiar to that area. That is something that the industry would require. Even when we talk of the Northeast, these Northeastern states, when they used to come to the Planning Commission for getting their annual plan grants, they were very concerned about their oral traditions, which were dying with the people who knew those oral traditions. So under culture, we used to give them a lot of funds, because in Planning Commission, the idea of education encompasses education, school and higher and technical, plus culture, youth affairs, sports. All of it together was as part of education. Now, all these aspects, including the fact that there is a science, technology and innovation policy, under which we are saying that for setting up laboratories, get funds from the Department of Science and Technology. So if you want to modernize vocational education and you need more instrumentation labs, get funds from the Department of Science and Technology. That policy is still to be approved, but we have made provisions for that over there. So we have this conventional thinking that funding comes only from Ministry of Education and nowhere else. If we go to Ministry of Labor, if we go to Ministry of Women and Child, all these, including social justice and empowerment for all our requirements, Ministry of Minority Affairs, Disability Affairs. So depending upon the group to which we are catering, we need to leverage the funds. That's why I said funding innovativeness, where you need to have not just the administrative people, even our own academics, who should start looking at these kind of funding possibilities. so that we can make up for that gap. You're very right. It is not, we cannot talk of equality where all are getting it, but we need to find ways by which we address those, bridge those gaps that are there.
So, madam, I think there is no other question. One query is there. Who is asking?
Hello, ma'am. Hello, ma'am. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your insights on NEP 2020. Really, like they were all eye-opener.
यहाँ से.
So, ma'am, I just wish to ask you, every policy has its pluses and minuses. So what were the weaknesses of NEP 1986 which have been suitably addressed by NEP 2020?
Dr. Ashfaq, policies are not made as course corrections of previous policies.
Okay.
Policies respond to the changing needs of a society. So we cannot make policies that policy mein kuch galat hai. We can never say that policy galat hai. That policy may not have been implemented in its entirety. That's a different thing. But we can always say that we are all beneficiaries of the 86 policy. We cannot say that we have not been beneficiaries of the 86 policy. We have not made 2020 as a course correction of 86. 86 was relevant at that point of time. 2020 is relevant to the current requirements. And some of it as a process of trying to make a policy, like 6% of GDP is reiterated. Or we say vocational education, we said in the NP 86 as a separate stream. We realize that as a separate stream, if you keep vocational education, it will do harm by creating another stratification of students, merge it within higher education. So some will get addressed, but a policy which is brought out is not to correct any mistakes of a previous policy. That policy was good at its given point of time. This policy is addressing another set of requirements. In that process, there may be some areas where we have learned and therefore we try to rectify. The kind of imbalances that may be rectified. But never see one policy as superseding another policy. It supersedes, but it is not a correction of that other policy.
Yeah, one last question, ma'am. One last question. With regard to the skill enhancement courses, which stands out at 2 credits. So how should be the distribution of these 2 credits? One for theory and one for practical. Do we need to have a practical component for skill enhancement courses?
Yes, practical is inbuilt into a skill enhancement course. You cannot.
So then it would be 1 + 1.
Yeah.
1 theory plus 1 practical.
Yes.
Okay.
It has to have either an apprenticeship kind of a thing or some activity by which they are actually getting exposed to that. Yeah.
Okay.
So, madam, thank you very much for your time and giving very, very thoughtful and very, very interesting lecture. And I hope that audience who are attending today's deliberation, their doubts are cleared. And madam, maybe when you are in Delhi sometime, visit our university as well, so that in your physical presence, teachers will be much benefited. So to end the program, I would request my colleague, Dr. Salik Noorani Khan. So anyway, sorry, in the program it was written Dr. Salik Noorani will give present vote of thanks. But as I am directed by the head of the botany department, Dr. Ashraf will make a vote of thanks. And basically on behalf of my own and university behalf, I thank you very much, madam. And from my colleague, Dr. Ashraf will make a formal vote of thanks.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you for such a engaging and riveting lecture. Actually, we have not done justice to you, because I know 2 hours is very less for you, and you would definitely require more time. But still, keeping within this time, it was wonderful that you have touched upon most of the points. And definitely, in case if we have more of such clarifications, especially with regard to the implementation of NEP 2020, definitely we would definitely look up to you for your inputs. And it was wonderful having you here. And of course, what is very important for me is what I really touched me is that within a very short span of time, small window of time, you agreed to, for delivering this special lecture. Thank you so much, ma'am. And also, I would like to thank the members of this organizing team of the special lecture, our IQAC director, Professor Raisuddin Sahab, and our HOD, Professor Shahid Umar, and I'm most indebted to our Honorable Vice Chancellor for having faith in me for the conduct of, for hosting and convening this, special lecture on NEP 2020, concept, relevance, and implementation. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you,
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My
And
pleasure. Thank you very
Take
much.
care.
My
Do take care. And I
do
hope
take
that
care.
we
Yeah,
meet again.
do stay
Allah
care
Hafiz.
and stay blessed. Yeah, Allah Hafiz.